At the edge of Egypt's Red Sea coast stands a hand-painted sign. Faded by the sun and the salt, it still reads, "Easy Entry, Blue Hole." Beside it, the water is almost impossibly clear. Visibility regularly reaches 30 to 40 meters, which is about 100 to 131 feet, among the clearest anywhere in the ocean. Coral gardens surround the entrance. Schools of brightly colored fish drift through water, so blue it almost doesn't look real. Nothing about this place looks dangerous, and yet since the 1980s, somewhere between 130 and more than 200 divers are believed to have died here. No official total exists. Local diving communities simply know that the number keeps growing. At the height of the site's unregulated years, the Blue Hole was claiming an average of 8 lives every year, roughly one diver every 6 weeks. Most of them were not beginners. Many were certified divers. Some were instructors. One was among the most respected safety divers in the freediving world, a man who lost his life not chasing a record, but trying to save someone else. At the center of the Blue Hole is a tunnel measuring 26 meters, or about 85 feet in length. It begins at 55 meters, which is about 180 feet below the surface. It is neither the deepest part of the site, nor, on paper, its most technically demanding feature, but it has become one of the deadliest passages in diving. A 22-year-old diving instructor entered that tunnel wearing a helmet camera after ignoring repeated warnings from experienced local divers. The camera was recovered intact. It captured his final dive from beginning to end, showing not a reckless amateur, but a trained diver slowly losing the ability to understand what was happening around him. The remarkable thing is that the same tunnel has also been crossed safely thousands of times by divers using the right training, equipment, and breathing gases. This is not a place that kills at random. It is a place that punishes very specific mistakes. If you're tucked in right now, phone dimmed, trying to let your brain slow down, this one was made for you. Give it a like, subscribe if you haven't. It's free, and it helps our channel more than you can imagine. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? Now, let's step into the Blue Hole itself, where one of the most beautiful places on Earth hides a lesson written in physics, chemistry, and human confidence. Morning light spreads across the eastern edge of the Sinai Peninsula before reaching a circle of water unlike anything around it, along the coast of the Gulf of Aqaba, a narrow branch of the Red Sea resting between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. The shoreline suddenly gives way to an opening that seems painted rather than formed by nature. Only a short journey north of Dahab, roughly 3 kilometers, which is about 1.9 miles from the heart of the town, this remarkable place can be reached directly from land without a boat by following a path that ends almost at the water itself. Dahab carries a name that means gold in Arabic, a memory of an older settlement where Bedouin families depended on fishing and the rhythms of the sea. Over the closing decades of the 20th century, visitors from across the world gradually transformed the town into one of the most celebrated diving destinations anywhere on Earth. Its welcoming atmosphere, modest cost, and extraordinary marine landscape drew instructors, explorers, photographers, and freedivers into a community that settled beside the shoreline, while never exhausting its fascination with the water beyond. The Blue Hole itself is a marine sinkhole, a nearly circular chamber carved into the reef and open directly to the sea above. From the surface, it spans roughly 60 meters, which is about 197 feet across, while its interior descends beyond 100 meters, which is about 328 feet, before reaching its deepest floor. From above, The contrast is unmistakable. Brilliant turquoise coral shelves surround a pool of rich sapphire blue, so deep in color that it appears almost detached from the surrounding sea. The name belongs not to legend, but to the remarkable geometry of light itself. Its entrance offers almost deceptive simplicity. Divers begin from shore, stepping into shallow water before reaching a natural opening known as the saddle, resting around 6 meters, which is about 20 feet below the surface. Few locations of such depth begin with such ordinary access. There is no long boat ride, no distant platform, no dramatic descent from a vessel. A person simply walks into the sea, follows the reef, and arrives at one of the deepest natural formations available from a shoreline anywhere in the world. That accessibility has welcomed many kinds of divers. Recreational visitors remain among coral gardens where vibrant reef life flourishes. Technical divers arrive with specialized plans intended for far greater depths. Free divers seek the remarkable clarity and vertical space that allow descent through open blue water. The Blue Hole accommodates each of these ambitions within the same landscape, while asking something very different from every path taken beneath the surface. The surrounding Red Sea provides conditions unlike almost any other marine environment. High salinity, warm water, and exceptionally low nutrient levels combine to create remarkable transparency. Visibility often extends between 30 and 40 meters, that is nearly 131 feet, allowing sunlight to penetrate astonishing distances below the waves. Coral colonies flourish in brilliant color. Reef fish drift through open water, and the entire environment appears suspended beneath an endless blue sky. Yet this remarkable clarity changes the character of the place in subtle ways. Features hidden in most oceans remain visible here from astonishing distances. Far below, an opening within the reef catches sunlight filtering through the water until it glows like polished sapphire. The effect is neither illusion nor imagination. It is the consequence of exceptionally transparent water, revealing a natural passage that geology shaped long before human beings ever arrived. During the last ice age, weakly acidic groundwater slowly dissolved limestone beneath the coastline, forming underground chambers that later flooded as sea levels rose. Portions of those ancient caverns collapsed, leaving the broad circular shaft seen today, while one surviving tunnel remained untouched. This passage, known simply as the Arch, begins around 55 meters, which is about 180 feet beneath the surface, and stretches for roughly 26 meters, that is nearly 85 feet, through the reef wall before opening once more into the vast Red Sea, carrying within its beauty the same ancient history that carved the Blue Hole itself. Light behaves differently beneath the reef than it does anywhere above the sea. As a diver follows the inner wall downward, the familiar brightness of the surface gradually softens into deeper shades of blue. Then, without warning, the limestone opens. Ahead, framed by ancient rock, appears a radiant window where sunlight pours through the far side of the reef. The color has been described again and again with nearly identical words: sapphire, cobalt, electric blue, as though every language eventually reaches the same conclusion when standing before the same remarkable sight. Seen from within the Blue Hole, the arch resembles far more than an ordinary tunnel. Its ceiling begins around 55 meters, which is about 180 feet beneath the surface, while the open Red Sea beyond gathers every beam of sunlight passing through the astonishingly transparent water above. Divers, instructors, and underwater writers have long regarded this view as one of the most extraordinary spectacles in recreational diving. During the late 1980s, One observer described it as a blaze of vivid blue light surrounded by darkness, comparing the distant opening to an immense sapphire suspended beneath the sea. The tunnel itself extends for roughly 26 meters, that is nearly 85 feet, yet the journey through it is more complicated than its length suggests. The passage does not continue across a level floor. Instead, the rocky bottom slopes steadily downward until it approaches about 120 meters, which is about 394 feet, where the tunnel finally reaches the outer reef wall. Every stroke forward carries a diver slightly deeper than the last, even while the destination appears almost close enough to touch. Its dimensions invite an unexpected rhythm. The space is broad enough for comfortable movement, allowing divers to pass through without squeezing between the walls, yet narrow enough that a careless movement of the fins can lift fine sediment from the rocky floor. Those drifting particles may spread through the water until visibility diminishes dramatically, replacing remarkable clarity with a pale haze that hides both the passage ahead and the route behind. Along the ceiling, living coral colonies cover the limestone in delicate shapes and colors, encouraging lingering glances that naturally slow the pace of travel. Long before anyone enters the tunnel, another influence has already begun its work. The remarkable transparency of the Red Sea changes human perception in subtle but consistent ways. Distances appear shorter than they truly are. Depth seems less imposing than careful measurement reveals. Divers studying the arch from above often imagine it resting closer to the surface than it actually does, not because they lack experience, but because exceptional visibility gently reshapes ordinary judgment. The very condition that makes the blue hole celebrated across the diving world also disguises the true scale of what lies below. Once inside the passage, the glowing exit continues that illusion. The luminous opening remains brilliantly defined, creating the impression that only a brief effort separates the diver from open water. It appears welcoming, familiar, almost effortless. Yet every moment spent swimming toward that distant light unfolds within increasing pressure, rising gas consumption, changing physiology, and an environment where a direct ascent is no longer possible because solid reef stretches overhead. Local diving instructors have often spoken of the arch as possessing an irresistible attraction that exists apart from experience or certification. Knowledge alone does not erase the influence of beauty, accomplishment, or the awareness that many others have crossed successfully before. The passage becomes more than stones shaped by ancient geology. It becomes an idea carried into the water, growing stronger as the glowing opening draws nearer. Its position within the blue hole deepens that challenge. A diver descending without precise awareness of depth and orientation can drift beyond the entrance entirely, continuing downward past 55 meters, which is about 180 feet, leads toward depths where the effects already beginning within the body steadily intensify. In this place, the tunnel itself is only one part of a larger design: optical perception, changing physiology, overhead rock, increasing gas demands, and unavoidable decompression obligations blend together until each condition strengthens the next, forming a landscape where natural beauty and natural law become impossible to separate. Stone remembers time in a way that living creatures never can. Long before the first diver entered the Red Sea, before reefs blossomed with coral or coastlines welcomed travelers, the rock beneath the Sinai Peninsula had already begun a transformation so gradual that no single lifetime could ever witness it. The passage now known as the Arch is the lingering trace of that immense history, shaped by natural forces that never intended to create either wonder or danger. Its beginning lies in ordinary rain falling across ancient limestone, As water absorbed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, it became gently acidic, carrying enough chemical strength to dissolve tiny amounts of carbonate rock wherever it found cracks and fractures. Year after year, century after century, that water slipped deeper into the stone, widening narrow openings until hidden chambers slowly emerged beneath the surface. The process is known as karst dissolution, and it has sculpted remarkable sinkholes across the world through patience rather than violence. The limestone beneath the Sinai Peninsula formed over immense spans of geological time, while warm tropical seas covered the region and countless marine organisms built thick layers of calcium-rich sediment across the ocean floor. Later, the African tectonic plate and the Arabian tectonic plate gradually pulled apart, creating the Red Sea itself. As the land separated, towering underwater cliffs and steep reef walls developed along the growing basin, giving this coastline the dramatic underwater landscape for which it is now celebrated. During the last ice age, sea levels stood much lower than they do today. Caverns created by dissolving limestone remained dry, extending beneath the coastal cliffs in darkness for thousands of years. As the climate gradually warmed, melting ice sheets returned vast quantities of water to the oceans. The sea advanced across the coastline, flooding those ancient chambers. Portions of their ceilings eventually collapsed, opening broad shafts to the surface while leaving stronger sections of stone untouched. The arch survived as one of those remaining corridors, preserving a natural tunnel that connected the flooded chamber to the open sea beyond. Nothing within that process carried purpose. The ceiling of the arch simply settled around 55 meters, which is about 180 feet, beneath the surface, because that was where the surviving rock remained intact after countless cycles of dissolution, collapse, and rising water. The passage occupies the same depth where recreational diving gives way to technical diving, not because geology understood human physiology, but because ancient stone followed only the slow logic of chemistry and time. Across much of the diving world, recreational training establishes 40 meters, which is about 131 feet, as the accepted maximum depth for compressed air. Beyond that point, specialized equipment, careful gas planning, and advanced procedures become essential. The entrance to the arch rests another 15 meters, that is nearly 49 feet, below this widely recognized boundary, placing it within conditions where ordinary recreational experience no longer matches the demands of the environment. Beyond the outer end of the tunnel, the reef wall descends into extraordinary depths. In some locations, it falls beyond 1,000 meters, that is nearly 3,281 feet, before reaching the distant seabed. There is no broad sandy floor waiting beneath the exit, only an immense vertical landscape fading into blue water. A diver who loses orientation beyond the reef encounters open depth without any natural platform to interrupt further descent. Inside the blue hole, the geology tells a different chapter of the same story. The circular shaft measures about 60 meters, which is about 197 feet, across, descending beyond 100 meters, which is about 328 feet, through limestone walls that support thriving coral in the upper reaches before gradually yielding to bare rock below. Every journey begins through the saddle, resting around 6 meters, that is nearly 20 feet, beneath the surface, where the reef suddenly falls away into open space. The remarkable harmony between beauty and hazard was never assembled piece by piece. Transparent water, towering walls, flourishing coral, and the arch itself all emerged from the same ancient sequence of dissolving limestone, shifting seas, and patient geological change. The landscape does not distinguish between those who admire it and those who travel through it. It simply remains what it has always been, a monument shaped by Earth alone, carrying every visitor through a history written in stone. Long before a diver notices anything unusual, pressure has already begun changing the chemistry inside the body. Nothing announces the shift. Breathing remains steady, movements still appear familiar, and every heartbeat continues its patient rhythm. Yet, at the depth where the arch begins, around 55 meters, which is about 180 feet, the human nervous system has entered conditions that exist nowhere on land, where ordinary air behaves in extraordinary ways. Among the gases carried into the lungs with every breath is nitrogen, normally an inactive companion throughout daily life. At the surface, it passes harmlessly through the body, taking little part in the work of consciousness. Deep beneath the sea, however, increasing pressure forces far greater amounts of nitrogen to dissolve into the bloodstream. From there, it reaches delicate neural tissue, where it begins influencing the membranes surrounding nerve cells. Divers know this reversible alteration of awareness as nitrogen narcosis, a phenomenon famously described by Jacques Cousteau as the rapture of the deep, a phrase that captures how strangely pleasant the experience can become. The transformation follows simple physical law. At sea level, every breath is taken under 1 atmosphere of surrounding pressure. By the time a diver reaches 55 meters, which is about 180 feet, the surrounding pressure has risen to roughly 6½ atmospheres. Air entering the lungs is compressed to that same level, carrying nitrogen into the bloodstream at about 6½ times its usual concentration. The result resembles alcohol intoxication so closely that many diving instructors rely upon familiar comparisons to explain an otherwise invisible process. One traditional guideline within the diving community is known as the Martini Rule. Although it serves only as an approximation, it offers an accessible picture of changing mental performance. Beyond 20 meters, which is about 66 feet, every additional 10 meters, which is about 33 feet, of depth is often compared with drinking another dry martini on an empty stomach. At the entrance to the arch, a diver breathing compressed air may experience impairment resembling roughly 3½ martinis, despite consuming nothing except ordinary breathing gas. Its effects unfold gradually. Reactions become slower. Reading depth gauges or pressure gauges requires greater concentration. Distances appear easier to judge than they truly are. Confidence often increases, even while judgment steadily declines. Some divers describe mild euphoria, others experience dreamlike detachment, and a smaller number report unusual perceptions that seem entirely convincing while they are happening. The remarkable feature is not simply that thinking changes, but that the ability to recognize those changes weakens at the very same time. Unlike alcohol consumed at the surface, nitrogen narcosis often conceals itself from the person experiencing it. Someone sharing a meal and several drinks may recognize growing intoxication through familiar sensations. A diver under narcosis frequently possesses no comparable awareness. The very mental processes responsible for evaluating attention, reasoning, and decision-making are among those being altered. The mind loses part of its ability to observe itself. Susceptibility also varies from one individual to another. Some divers notice meaningful impairment around 30 meters, that is nearly 100 feet, while others remain relatively unaffected until much greater depths. Even the same diver may respond differently from one descent to the next, influenced by fatigue, emotional strain, physical exertion, or cooler water. No dependable calculation predicts exactly when the experience will become significant for a particular person on a particular day. One reassuring aspect of nitrogen narcosis is also one reason it is underestimated. Its effects disappear rapidly during ascent. As surrounding pressure decreases, dissolved nitrogen leaves neural tissue, and ordinary mental clarity returns within only a few meters, that is nearly several feet of upward movement. Many divers remember surviving such episodes with little lasting consequence, encouraging the impression that the condition is manageable simply because recovery was swift. Technical divers reduce this hazard by replacing much of the narcotic nitrogen with helium inside carefully planned breathing mixtures known as trimix. Helium produces far less narcotic effect under pressure, allowing clearer thinking at depths where compressed air becomes increasingly unsuitable. Such dives demand specialized education, dedicated equipment, detailed planning, and disciplined preparation. At the depth of the arch, physiology continues, following the same physical laws for every human body, whether those laws are fully appreciated or not. Every breath taken beneath the sea carries an invisible calculation. The lungs expand as they always do. The regulator delivers air with reassuring regularity, and nothing about the motion seems unusual. Yet, beneath that familiar rhythm, the mathematics of pressure has already begun keeping an exact account. Unlike judgment or perception, these numbers never hesitate, never adapt, and never offer an exception. The guiding principle is known as Boyle's law, describing how gases respond as surrounding pressure increases. A diver descending through seawater enters an environment where every additional layer of depth compresses the breathing gas more tightly than before. Although each breath fills the lungs to the same physical volume, that volume now contains far more gas molecules than it did near the surface. At roughly 55 meters, which is about 180 feet, surrounding pressure reaches approximately 6½ atmospheres, meaning every inhalation consumes about 6½ times as much breathing gas as an identical breath taken above the sea. The tank itself never changes. A standard cylinder holding approximately 11 liters of compressed air at around 200 bar contains a fixed amount of breathing gas from the moment the dive begins. Near the surface, that reserve may support an average diver for somewhere between 70 and 90 minutes under relaxed conditions. At the depth of the arch, however, the very same supply can provide only about 10 to 14 minutes of equivalent breathing time before accounting for any additional effort demanded by movement, changing currents, or increasing stress. The dive profile draws steadily upon that limited reserve. Gas is consumed throughout the descent before the tunnel has even been reached. The passage itself stretches roughly 26 meters, that is nearly 85 feet, while its sloping floor encourages greater exertion than a level swim would require. Even a gentle current entering from the open Red Sea can increase breathing rate, causing each inhalation to empty the cylinder faster than careful planning originally predicted. Every pause, every unnecessary movement, and every moment spent lingering beneath the reef quietly alters the remaining balance. Another obligation grows alongside that shrinking gas supply. Time spent breathing compressed air at significant depth allows dissolved nitrogen to accumulate within body tissues. Returning directly to the surface too rapidly risks decompression sickness, a condition in which nitrogen leaves solution and forms bubbles inside blood vessels and tissues before the body can remove it naturally. Those bubbles may interfere with circulation, damage nerves, injure joints, or disrupt the function of vital organs. Safe ascent, therefore, requires planned decompression stops, remaining at carefully selected depths long enough for dissolved nitrogen to leave the body gradually rather than violently. Those pauses demand breathing gas of their own. A diver reaching the end of the arch, with only a small reserve remaining, faces an impossible arithmetic. Surfacing immediately increases the likelihood of decompression sickness. Remaining at decompression stops without sufficient air cannot be sustained. Alone beneath the water, there is no additional cylinder waiting nearby, no unexpected reserve arriving from above. Technical diving addresses this challenge through disciplined gas planning. One widely respected approach divides available gas into three portions. One portion is reserved for reaching the destination, another for returning, and the final portion remains untouched unless an emergency develops. For a demanding dive through the arch using only a single standard cylinder, that calculation leaves almost no allowance for hesitation, elevated breathing caused by exertion, or a navigational delay inside the passage. A remarkably small deviation can consume what was intended as protection. This narrow margin explains one of the enduring misunderstandings surrounding the Blue Hole. The arch has indeed been crossed successfully using a single, standard cylinder. Those documented successes are entirely real. Yet they represent dives completed under exceptionally favorable conditions, with remarkable precision and virtually no room for error. Their existence can create the impression that success depends mainly upon determination rather than preparation. Proper technical dives approach the same route differently. Additional stage cylinders provide dedicated breathing gas for the tunnel itself and for decompression during ascent. Every portion of the journey is planned before entering the water, with reserve calculations built around physical law rather than optimism. Pressure, gas consumption, and decompression continue following the same equations for every diver, turning the arch into a place where arithmetic becomes as influential as the stone through which the passage was formed. Among the many names connected to the Blue Hole, one continues to surface in diving classrooms across the world with unusual persistence. The story belongs to Yuri Lipski, a young diving instructor whose final descent became one of the clearest records ever captured of how deep water can overcome experience through the ordinary laws of physics and human biology. Yuri Lipski was 22 years old when he traveled to Dahab during the spring of the year 2000. Born in what is now Russia and later living in Israel, he had already earned certification as a diving instructor. He understood equipment, procedures, and the accepted limits of recreational diving. His visit was not driven by curiosity alone. He hoped to document one of the most famous underwater locations on Earth by reaching the lower reaches of the Blue Hole and filming the arch from below with a camera mounted to his helmet. Before entering the water, he sought advice from Tarek Omar, whose reputation at the site had already been established through years of technical diving and recovery work. Omar understood the unusual demands of the Blue Hole better than almost anyone else. He advised Lipski that the dive required extensive preparation, specialized breathing gas, proper planning, and a reliable diving partner. The recommendation was direct and practical. Return after dedicated training and attempt the dive only when fully prepared. Time, however, was limited. Lipski had only a brief stay in Dahab. Rather than postponing the attempt, he entered the water alone through the familiar saddle, resting around 6 meters, which is about 20 feet beneath the surface. From there, he descended along the interior wall, passing beneath the level where the arch begins. The camera remained recording throughout the descent, preserving each movement as the surrounding pressure steadily increased. The depth gauge visible in the recording reveals a descent beyond 81 meters, which is about 266 feet, then beyond 91 meters, that is nearly 299 feet, while he continued moving downward. At such depths on compressed air, nitrogen narcosis is expected to become profoundly disabling. Mental processing slows dramatically, judgment deteriorates, and actions that appear straightforward near the surface become increasingly difficult to organize. Every additional meter compounds the challenge, while breathing gas disappears at a rapidly accelerating rate. Eventually, the descent reached approximately 115 meters, which is about 377 feet. The camera settled as the sandy bottom released a pale cloud of fine sediment that drifted through the surrounding water. An audible alarm from his equipment continued sounding, marking a depth far beyond the limits for a recreational dive using a single cylinder of compressed air. Lipski attempted to inflate his buoyancy compensator, the device intended to help a diver begin ascending. For reasons that remain uncertain, the ascent never followed. Investigators have considered several possibilities, including overwhelming nitrogen narcosis, oxygen toxicity, equipment difficulty, or a combination of multiple factors acting together. The recording alone cannot determine which explanation is correct. The following morning, Tarek Omar descended to recover Yuri Lipski at the request of his family. Beside him rested the camera, still intact despite the immense pressure. Omar returned both the equipment and the recording to Lipski's mother, preserving an account that would later become known throughout the diving community. Years afterward, the recovered footage appeared publicly and has since been viewed by millions of people. Its lasting importance does not come from spectacle. Diving instructors frequently present it as a teaching document because it captures something rarely witnessed with such clarity. The recording preserves the final moments of a trained professional whose knowledge could not overcome the combined effects of depth, pressure, breathing gas, and the unforgiving arithmetic of the blue hole, leaving behind one of the most enduring lessons ever carried back from beneath the Red Sea. Tarek Omar speaks about the blue hole with the familiarity of someone describing a place woven into everyday life. He once said he knows it as well as his own kitchen, a comparison that carries unusual weight when the place in question is a vast chamber beneath the waters of the Red Sea. For more than 3 decades, its walls, ledges, and changing light have become part of his memory, not as distant landmarks but as surroundings revisited again and again through countless descents. He first arrived in Dahab during the late 1980s, seeking work as tourism along the Sinai coastline steadily expanded. Diving soon became more than employment. By the early 1990s, he had learned the discipline, and within only a few years he had progressed into technical diving, eventually setting an Egyptian depth record with a descent reaching 209 meters, which is about 686 feet. Those accomplishments brought respect, yet they also placed him among the very small number of divers capable of entering places beyond ordinary recreational limits. His connection with the Blue Hole began as that of an instructor guiding others through one of the world's most remarkable marine landscapes. Over time, another responsibility emerged without invitation. When a diver disappeared into depths exceeding 100 meters, which is about 328 feet, few people possessed both the training and the willingness to attempt a recovery. Gradually, those calls reached him with increasing frequency, until retrieving the lost became an accepted part of his life. He has always resisted describing those recoveries as a profession. Instead, he calls them missions. He performs them without payment, believing that returning someone to their family is reason enough. Before every descent, he studies the final known location, the equipment carried by the diver, the amount of lead weight attached, and the conditions inside the blue hole. From those scattered details, he constructs a careful picture of where the body may have come to rest before beginning a dive that demands precision from the first breath to the last. Their names are spoken together because their story never truly separates. Conor O'Regan and Martin Guerra arrived in Dahab as friends bound by a shared fascination with the sea, carrying plans that stretched well beyond a single journey. One had already spent many months in Egypt working as a diving instructor, learning the rhythms of the Red Sea and building experience beneath its clear waters. The other had recently completed an economics degree at Trinity College Dublin before traveling to join him. Together, they imagined returning to Ireland to create a travel company devoted to introducing others to remarkable diving destinations across the world. The Blue Hole was meant to become part of that dream. Before inviting future travelers to places of legendary reputation, they wanted to experience one of the most celebrated dive sites themselves. It was intended as preparation rather than spectacle, another chapter in lives already shaped by diving, built upon confidence earned through previous descents and strengthened by the trust they placed in one another. They entered the water side by side through the familiar opening that countless divers had crossed before them. As the limestone walls descended around them, the environment gradually changed in ways that could not be measured by sight alone. The increasing pressure altered every breath, every decision, every passing moment. Somewhere along that descent, amid the growing effects of depth upon the human mind, the reference points that normally guide experienced divers began to disappear. Whether through changing position, narrowing attention, or the subtle influence of nitrogen narcosis, they became separated from the path that should have carried them safely home. The descent continued beyond the limits their equipment and breathing gas could safely support. At those depths, the body consumes compressed air with relentless speed, while judgment becomes increasingly unreliable. Small decisions grow uncertain, familiar procedures become difficult to perform, and the difference between control and confusion narrows until it can almost vanish. In that altered state, both divers continued downward into a place where recovery through ordinary action became steadily less possible. When Tarek Omar later searched for them, he descended to 102 meters, which is about 335 feet. There, resting against the floor of the blue hole, he found them together. Their arms remained wrapped around one another, preserved in the final embrace they had shared. The image stayed with him long after the recovery ended, becoming one of the earliest memories that defined the work he would continue for decades. It was not merely the recovery of two divers. It was the moment the blue hole revealed, with lasting clarity, the human cost hidden beneath its remarkable beauty. For Omar, that mission became the beginning of a pattern repeated across many years. Each future recovery would differ in its details, yet the underlying story rarely changed. Divers arrived with skill, enthusiasm, and respect for the sea, but respect alone could not overcome the combined demands of depth, physiology, and unforgiving physics. The blue hole required preparation extending beyond ordinary recreational experience, regardless of confidence or previous success elsewhere. Conor O'Regan and Martin Guerra were never remembered as reckless thrill seekers. They were dedicated divers whose ambitions grew from genuine love of the underwater world and the hope of sharing it with others. Today, their names remain engraved upon the memorial plaques overlooking the entrance to the Blue Hole, joining many others carried there by similar hopes. The stone above the shoreline preserves only a few carefully carved words, yet beneath those cliffs their story continues to echo as a reminder that the sea recognizes neither intention nor aspiration, answering every descent with the same unwavering laws of nature. Morning arrives at the Blue Hole long before the first bubbles rise through the water. Along the limestone cliff overlooking the entrance, another collection of voices waits without speaking. They are carved into stone, fastened to rock by families, friends, instructors, and diving companions who traveled from distant places carrying memories that could no longer be shared beneath the surface. Before a diver reaches the shoreline, these plaques become part of the journey, standing above the sea as enduring witnesses to decades of return visits made under very different circumstances. Each plaque belongs to an individual story. Some display only a name and the years that marked a life. Others include a brief sentence chosen with great care, a final thought preserved against the desert wind. One memorial dedicated to James Smith, who died at the age of 23 during the early years of the new century, bears the words, "Do not let fear stand in the way of your dreams." Another remembers Karl Marx, an Austrian diver whose life ended at the Blue Hole several years later. Nearby, another stone honors Daniel Malik and Tarek El-Kadi, two friends who entered the water on the same day during the late 1980s and never returned. Together, these inscriptions reveal remarkably little about the dives themselves, yet they preserve something far more enduring, the identities of those whose absence continues to be felt. The memorials represent only a portion of the people who have died there. They exist because someone made the journey back to Dahab, carrying grief and the determination to leave a permanent mark upon the cliff. Many other families never placed a plaque, while incomplete official records have made the total number of fatalities difficult to establish with certainty. The collection growing across the limestone is therefore not a complete register, but a visible fragment of a much larger history whose full dimensions remain uncertain. Their variety reflects the international character of the diving community itself. Names from across Europe stand beside those from the Middle East, the United States, Australia, Russia, and many parts of Asia. The Blue Hole became famous because divers from around the world sought its remarkable waters, and the memorials reveal that its reach extended just as widely. Languages differ from plaque to plaque, yet every inscription speaks through the same enduring medium of carved stone overlooking the sea. The collection has never appeared all at once. It has grown gradually across decades, each new memorial finding its place beside those that came before. A visitor walking toward the familiar shoreline passes them one after another, each stone quietly occupying its own place without competing for attention. Their steady accumulation creates a chronology that no guidebook can fully convey, recording the passing of years through individual lives rather than statistics. Only a short distance away stands the welcoming sign identifying the easy entry into the Blue Hole. For many visitors, the contrast is striking. The invitation to enter the water has remained beside the memorials for years, neither replacing the other nor diminishing its presence. Both belong to the landscape, and together they describe the unusual character of the site more honestly than either could alone. Divers continue arriving almost every day. Equipment is assembled, breathing systems are checked, conversations drift between instructors and students, and preparations unfold much as they have for many years. The plaques remain part of that routine, familiar enough that experienced visitors often pass them without stopping, yet enduring enough that newcomers seldom fail to notice them. They neither forbid descent nor encourage it. They simply remain where they have been placed, allowing every person who walks toward the water to decide what meaning to carry forward. Among those who has watched this collection expand, Tarek Omar occupies a singular place. He has witnessed families returning with memorial stones, and he has recovered many of the divers whose names those stones now preserve. For him, the plaques are not historical markers viewed from a distance. They are reminders of faces remembered, missions completed, and conversations that ended far too soon. Together they form the Blue Hole's most enduring record, assembled one stone at a time above the water, where every descent begins beneath the memory of those who came before. Not every name remembered at the Blue Hole belongs to someone pursuing greater depth for personal achievement. One story follows a different current, shaped not by ambition, but by responsibility. Stephen Keenan entered the water because another diver depended upon him. His final dive became a reminder that even those entrusted with protecting others remain subject to the same unyielding realities beneath the surface. Born during the late 1970s in Ireland, Keenan first discovered freediving while visiting Dahab during the closing years of the first decade of the new century. What began as a holiday gradually became a new life. He settled in the town, learned Arabic, immersed himself in the local community, and devoted himself to mastering a discipline built entirely upon a single breath. Together with Miguel Lozano and Pascal Berger, he later helped establish Dahab Freedivers, where he trained hundreds of students from Egypt, Spain, the Philippines, and many other places drawn to the remarkable waters of the Red Sea. Within the international freediving community, Keenan became known for a role that demanded extraordinary discipline rather than public recognition. He served as a safety diver, descending through open water to meet athletes returning from extreme depths, offering visual guidance while remaining prepared to intervene if consciousness failed during the ascent. The work required exceptional judgment, physical endurance, and unwavering attention. Among the many athletes who trusted him was Alexei Molchanov, whose achievements in competitive freediving placed him among the most accomplished breath-hold divers in history. Molchanov described Keenan simply as the finest safety diver they had. During the summer of the late 2010s, Italian freediver Alessia Zecchini arrived at the Blue Hole to attempt a celebrated crossing of the arch on a single breath. She already held multiple world records and possessed experience matched by very few athletes. Keenan accepted responsibility for her safety, preparing to meet her during the ascent at a carefully planned location beneath the surface. Every movement depended upon precise timing shared between two people who could not exchange a single word underwater. The conditions that day were less forgiving than usual. Visibility had declined, while surface winds generated currents capable of carrying a freediver away from the intended line of ascent. Those circumstances narrowed an already demanding margin. Keenan reached the planned meeting point only moments later than expected. During that brief interval, measured in little more than several heartbeats, Zecchini became disoriented and began swimming away from the correct direction. Keenan located her, redirected her path, and guided her toward the surface until she emerged safely into open air. His own ascent ended differently. As he neared the final 10 meters, which is about 33 feet below the surface, the changing pressure reduced the oxygen available to his brain. He experienced a shallow water blackout, the sudden loss of consciousness that can occur during the last moments of a breath-hold ascent, even after an apparently successful dive. It is one of the defining hazards of freediving because it often arrives without pain or advance warning, leaving only seconds for another safety diver to intervene. Keenan had devoted years to preventing exactly that outcome for others, yet no one occupied the position needed to rescue him. He was discovered floating near the surface, and immediate attempts to revive him began without delay. Despite every effort, he could not be saved and died while being transported toward medical care. His passing became the first recorded fatality of a safety diver, actively protecting another athlete during a competitive-style freediving operation, a distinction that reflected not failure of character, but the extraordinary rarity of such an event. News of his death spread rapidly throughout the global freediving community. Athletes, instructors, students, and longtime friends described him with remarkable consistency. They remembered steadiness, generosity, and absolute reliability, qualities that inspired confidence whenever he entered the water beside them. Today, his name rests among the memorial plaques overlooking the Blue Hole, where it honors not a pursuit of personal glory, but a life spent placing another diver's survival before his own. The final stretch toward the surface carries an appearance of safety that can be deeply misleading. After the long descent, the turn beneath the arch, and the patient climb back through blue water, only a small distance remains. Yet within those last moments, the body enters one of the most unforgiving transitions in all of diving. One governed not by fatigue alone, but by the changing behavior of oxygen under pressure. Shallow water blackout is a loss of consciousness that occurs during the ascent from a breath-hold dive, most often within the final 10 meters, which is about 33 feet beneath the surface. Unlike the effects of nitrogen narcosis or the gradual exhaustion of compressed breathing gas, this phenomenon belongs entirely to freediving. It develops from the relationship between pressure and oxygen, transforming an apparently successful ascent into a medical emergency within only a few breaths of reaching daylight. A freediver begins every descent with lungs filled at normal atmospheric pressure. As depth increases, the surrounding water compresses the air inside those lungs. Although the body steadily consumes oxygen throughout the dive, the greater pressure at depth keeps the remaining oxygen at a concentration capable of sustaining normal brain function. The diver often feels composed, movements remain deliberate, and every stroke appears controlled. Nothing in those moments necessarily suggests that consciousness is nearing its limit. The ascent gradually reverses every one of those conditions. As surrounding pressure falls, the concentration of oxygen available within the lungs also drops. The body has already consumed much of its original supply, and the remaining oxygen may suddenly fall below the minimum level required to sustain awareness. That transition can occur during the final 10 meters, which is about 33 feet before the surface, precisely when success appears almost certain. Consciousness simply disappears, not because the diver made a final mistake, but because physical law has shifted faster than the body can compensate. Perhaps the most deceptive characteristic of shallow water blackout is its absence of warning. Divers who survive documented events consistently describe no dramatic sensation announcing what was about to happen. There is often no dizziness, no overwhelming discomfort, and no gradual fading of awareness. One instant, the swimmer continues upward with complete purpose, and the next, the brain no longer receives enough oxygen to remain awake. The transformation is immediate, leaving little opportunity for self-rescue. If a blackout occurs only a few meters beneath the surface, positive buoyancy may continue carrying the unconscious diver upward. Reaching open air alone, however, does not guarantee survival. The body's first involuntary breath can draw water into the airway unless another diver is already there, supporting the head above the surface and protecting normal breathing until consciousness returns. This responsibility belongs to the safety diver, whose task extends far beyond observation. The safety diver descends to approximately 10 meters, which is about 33 feet, meets the ascending athlete, and remains close enough to respond without hesitation if awareness is lost. That was the role Keenan had practiced for years. On the day of his final dive, Unexpected conditions delayed the planned meeting with Alessia Zecchini, requiring additional searching beneath the surface. Those extra moments consumed part of the limited oxygen reserve Keenan carried within his own body. After locating her and guiding her towards safety, he began his ascent with too little remaining margin. Near the final 10 meters, which is about 33 feet below the surface, shallow water blackout claimed the very diver whose profession centered upon preventing it. Across the global freediving community, shallow water blackout accounts for a substantial share of fatal accidents. The challenge presented by the arch magnifies that danger because a single breath must sustain the descent, the crossing itself, and the entire return toward daylight. Every successful passage depends upon a remarkably narrow balance between distance, effort, timing, and oxygen. Stephen Keenan spent years protecting that balance for others. During one extraordinary rescue, the balance finally shifted beyond even his remarkable ability to hold it. Competence leaves its own unmistakable traces. Every diver who reaches the Blue Hole has already learned skills that once seemed difficult, mastered procedures that once demanded careful practice, and accumulated experiences that gradually transformed uncertainty into confidence. Seen from a distance, that progression appears to promise increasing safety. Yet the history of the arch reveals a pattern that follows a different course, one in which experience alone is not the deciding factor. The common assumption is that tragedies belong mostly to beginners, to visitors who entered unfamiliar water without preparation or awareness. The record assembled through local instructors, accident investigators, and decades of observation tells another story. Many of those who never returned were certified divers. Some held advanced recreational qualifications, others possessed technical certifications. A number worked as instructors themselves, guiding students through dives that were entirely appropriate within the limits of recreational practice. Part of that pattern begins long before anyone enters the water. The reputation of the Blue Hole discourages many complete novices from attempting the arch. Those who arrive with the intention of reaching it usually believe they have earned that opportunity through previous experience. They have completed challenging dives elsewhere, managed difficult conditions, and built confidence through genuine accomplishment. Their belief is not rooted in carelessness. It grows from success, reinforced over years beneath the surface. The critical misunderstanding lies not in whether these divers are capable, but in the assumption that one form of capability naturally extends into another. Recreational diving and technical diving share equipment, water, and many familiar procedures, yet they differ in the same way that ordinary mountain hiking differs from high-altitude climbing. Both involve moving across rugged ground, but the equipment, planning, physiology, and acceptable margins for error become entirely different. An advanced recreational certification prepares divers for demanding recreational profiles, commonly extending to 40 meters, which is about 131 feet. The ceiling of the arch begins another 15 meters deeper, that is nearly 49 feet beyond that recognized limit. By the time a diver reaches that depth while breathing compressed air, nitrogen narcosis has already begun altering judgment. Earlier experiences at 30 meters, that is nearly 98 feet, or even 35 meters, which is about 115 feet, offer little preparation for the dramatic changes occurring deeper below. The mind naturally relies upon familiar successes to predict future outcomes, yet the environment has crossed into conditions where those earlier comparisons no longer remain reliable. Unfortunately, the altered awareness produced by narcosis makes recognizing that difference increasingly difficult. Psychologists describe another influence that quietly accompanies human decision-making. It is known as optimism bias, the tendency for people to believe that unfavorable outcomes are less likely to happen to themselves than to others. This tendency appears across many areas of life, especially when previous success encourages confidence. It does not arise from arrogance alone, nor does it disappear simply because someone possesses detailed information. Knowledge and instinct often travel separate paths. Every diver who attempted the arch expecting success carried reasons supporting that belief. Training certificates represented genuine achievement. Previous dives demonstrated real competence. Physical fitness and familiarity with underwater environments strengthened confidence further. Against those personal experiences stood statistics, accident reports, and stories shared by instructors who knew the site intimately. Human judgment naturally grants greater emotional weight to personal success than to distant probability, even when the probabilities deserve greater attention. That explains why education by itself has never eliminated the pattern. Divers can understand nitrogen, narcosis, decompression sickness, gas consumption, and the history of previous accidents, while still believing their own dive will unfold differently. The Blue Hole has received visitors from many nations, across many generations, speaking different languages and bringing different levels of experience. Yet the recurring thread remains remarkably consistent. Those who attempted the arch were often capable enough to reach its entrance. The distance they misjudged was not measured through water alone, but between established recreational skill and the entirely different discipline the arch quietly demanded. Long before a diver reaches the stone opening itself, another passage has already begun. It is invisible, carried within every breath drawn from the tank, unfolding gradually inside the nervous system. Nothing about the surrounding water announces its arrival. The reef remains unchanged, instruments continue displaying their readings, and every familiar movement still seems possible. Yet the mind interpreting those signals is no longer the same mind that entered the sea. The most revealing characteristic of nitrogen narcosis is not confusion alone, but the remarkable confidence that often accompanies it. Jacques Cousteau described this state as the rapture of the deep, a phrase that has endured because it captures an experience reported by many divers over decades. Rather than producing immediate distress, significant narcosis can generate a powerful sense of comfort, capability, and belonging. The diver may feel unusually calm, convinced that every decision is sensible and every movement remains under complete control. At depths approaching 30 meters, which is about 98 feet, and extending toward 40 meters, which is about 131 feet, many trained divers experience measurable slowing of thought while remaining generally aware that something has changed. Reading instruments may require greater concentration. Small calculations take longer. Reactions become less immediate. Even then, many retain enough awareness to recognize that their judgment deserves additional caution. Beyond 50 meters, which is about 164 feet, the nature of the impairment changes. The ability to examine one's own thinking begins to fade alongside the thinking itself. Psychologists describe this capacity as monitoring awareness, the mind's ability to evaluate its own condition while decisions are being made. Nitrogen narcosis weakens precisely that higher function. The diver loses not only judgment, but also the ability to recognize that judgment has deteriorated. Confidence survives long after reliable reasoning has begun to disappear. This explains a recurring pattern witnessed at the Blue Hole. Divers searching for the entrance to the arch occasionally pass beyond it and continue descending. From the surface, such a decision appears incomprehensible. At depth, however, the altered nervous system no longer evaluates the descent through ordinary reasoning. Continuing downward can seem entirely acceptable. Turning upward requires careful assessment, disciplined restraint, and accurate self-evaluation, exactly the mental abilities narcosis has already begun dismantling. The recovered recording made by Yuri Lipski offers one of the clearest illustrations ever documented. His depth alarm continues sounding as he reaches approximately 115 meters, that is nearly 377 feet. His instruments would have displayed a depth far beyond the safe operating range of compressed air. He attempts to inflate his buoyancy compensator, demonstrating that his training remained somewhere within memory. Yet the sequence never reaches a successful conclusion. The recording captures an unsettling intersection where learned responses persist, while the brain directing those responses no longer functions with complete reliability. One characteristic of nitrogen narcosis has unintentionally contributed to its reputation as a manageable hazard. The condition reverses rapidly during ascent. As surrounding pressure decreases, dissolved nitrogen gradually leaves the nervous system and clear thinking returns. Divers who survive often remember the experience as something they successfully handled rather than something that fundamentally altered their decision-making. That memory can quietly reshape later choices, making a deeper dive appear less intimidating because the previous encounter ended without lasting consequences. Technical divers reduce this danger by replacing much of the narcotic nitrogen with helium through a breathing mixture known as trimix. That solution cannot be improvised at the shoreline. It requires specialized equipment, careful planning, and extensive preparation completed long before entering the water. A diver standing at the saddle with compressed air has already committed to the limits of that gas. For decades, instructors in Dahab have shown Yuri Lipski's recording not as a spectacle, but as a lesson in physiology. The recording demonstrates that chemistry remains indifferent to reputation, confidence, certification, and experience. By the time a diver reaches the arch, nitrogen narcosis is no longer waiting ahead. It has already become part of every thought guiding the journey through the water. A doorway can remain completely invisible until the moment it is already behind you. Beneath the waters of the Blue Hole, the arch offers no signpost, no painted marker, and no artificial light to announce its position. It exists as a natural opening carved into stone, waiting along a particular stretch of the interior wall. Finding it depends upon careful navigation at precisely the depth where careful navigation becomes increasingly difficult. The descent toward the arch requires several tasks unfolding at once. A diver must monitor depth continuously until reaching approximately 55 meters. That is nearly 180 feet. At the same time, orientation along the northeastern wall must remain accurate, while the changing contours of limestone and coral are examined for the entrance itself. None of these demands is especially difficult in isolation. Together, and under the influence of increasing pressure upon the nervous system, they create an unusually demanding sequence of decisions. Even during favorable conditions, locating the arch requires active searching rather than casual observation. The water of the Red Sea is often exceptionally clear, allowing remarkable visibility across long distances. Yet, clarity alone cannot replace attention. If previous divers have disturbed fine sediment, suspended particles may drift through the water, reducing visibility around the wall. Seasonal blooms of microscopic algae can produce similar effects. Under those circumstances, the entrance becomes less obvious, blending into the surrounding rock until only its distinctive shape separates it from countless natural formations nearby. If the opening is overlooked, the descent continues almost effortlessly. Gravity, momentum, and the gradual release of air from buoyancy equipment carry the diver farther downward along the wall. Passing below 55 meters, that is nearly 180 feet, does not immediately produce an unmistakable warning. Instead, the surrounding landscape changes gradually, while nitrogen narcosis deepens with every additional meter. Soon, the diver approaches depths of 80 meters, that is nearly 262 feet, then perhaps 100 meters, which is about 328 feet. By then, the arch has been left above, no longer available as a passage into the open sea. Returning requires recognizing the mistake, stopping the descent, re-establishing orientation, and beginning a controlled ascent. Each of those actions depends upon clear judgment precisely when judgment has become increasingly compromised. The lower interior of the blue hole offers remarkably few visual clues. Coral growth becomes sparse, giving way to broad surfaces of limestone and a floor composed largely of sand and accumulated sediment. Without prominent landmarks, the environment appears repetitive, making depth difficult to appreciate through vision alone. Instruments provide the necessary information, yet reading and correctly interpreting those instruments depends upon mental clarity that may already be fading. Several documented fatalities have followed this general sequence. Divers descended intending to locate the arch, failed to recognize the entrance, continued toward the bottom, and reached depths where nitrogen narcosis became profoundly disabling. Gas consumption accelerated, decompression obligations accumulated, and the physical demands of returning exceeded the diver's remaining capacity. The descent itself unfolded smoothly. The return became increasingly unlikely. From the shallow saddle, resting at approximately 6 meters, which is about 20 feet beneath the surface, to the deepest portions of the hole spans more than 94 meters, which is about 308 feet. That vertical journey can unfold surprisingly quickly, especially during an uninterrupted descent. Human physiology, however, does not adapt at the same pace. By the time the body fully reveals the consequences of that depth, the diver may already be far beyond the point where simple corrections remain effective. Experienced instructors in Dahab eventually developed highly specific navigation briefings for anyone properly trained to attempt the arch. Compass headings, distinctive formations within the wall, expected depths, and planned decision points all became part of disciplined preparation. Those instructions function only when paired with appropriate equipment, technical training, and the willingness to follow them without improvisation. Recognition of these recurring accidents eventually prompted Egyptian authorities to maintain oversight at the entry point, requiring divers to be accompanied by certified guides before entering the site. The measure could not alter the geology beneath the water, nor the chemistry unfolding within a diver's body. It could only encourage the careful planning that the blue hole had always required, even when its inviting entrance suggested otherwise. Passing through the arch can feel, for a brief moment, like the completion of an extraordinary journey. The limestone tunnel has fallen behind, the open waters of the Red Sea spread outward once more, and the most obvious obstacle appears to have been overcome. Yet, the most important calculation of the dive has only begun. The challenge beneath the water gradually becomes a challenge carried within the diver's own body. The condition known as decompression sickness, often called the bends, begins with a process that is entirely natural under pressure. While breathing compressed air at depths of approximately 55 meters, that is nearly 180 feet, body tissues steadily absorb dissolved nitrogen from every breath. The longer the diver remains at depth, the more nitrogen enters muscles, nerves, joints, and blood. This invisible exchange follows physical law with complete consistency, continuing regardless of confidence, experience, or familiarity with the blue hole. The arch itself requires time to cross. A diver descends to the entrance, swims through approximately 26 meters, that is nearly 85 feet, of tunnel, then exits into the open sea after following a passage whose floor gently slopes downward before rising again. Every additional minute extends nitrogen absorption. By the time the diver reaches open water, the body contains more dissolved nitrogen than can safely escape during a direct ascent to the surface. Instead, the return must unfold gradually. Planned decompression stops become essential stages of the journey rather than optional pauses. Depending upon the precise depth profile and the amount of time spent below, a diver commonly pauses at approximately 6 meters, which is about 20 feet, and again at 3 meters, that is nearly 10 feet. During these intervals, dissolved nitrogen leaves the tissues in a controlled manner, passing harmlessly back into the lungs before being exhaled. Patience, rather than speed, becomes the safest path upward. If those stops are omitted, the dissolved gas no longer leaves the body smoothly. Nitrogen can separate into bubbles within blood vessels and tissues, much as bubbles suddenly appear when a pressurized container is opened. Small bubbles may produce aching joints, unusual skin, discoloration, or profound exhaustion. Larger or more numerous bubbles can interrupt blood flow to the brain or spinal cord, leading to paralysis, permanent neurological injury, or death. The outcome varies from one individual to another, but the underlying mechanism remains unchanged. A difficult reality emerges when gas reserves have already been consumed reaching and crossing the arch. Decompression requires breathing gas throughout every planned stop. A diver who reaches open water with an almost empty cylinder cannot simply wait without air. The remaining choices become dangerously limited. Surfacing immediately avoids suffocation but greatly increases the likelihood that decompression sickness will develop. Remaining below without breathing gas is impossible. The arithmetic described earlier continues without compromise. For this reason, properly equipped technical divers calculate decompression requirements before entering the water, carrying sufficient breathing gas not only for the descent and the crossing, but also for every planned stop and every reasonable contingency. Those calculations exist because successful navigation of the arch represents only part of the complete dive profile. Dahab maintains a recompression chamber specifically because decompression sickness occurs often enough to demand permanent readiness. Inside that facility, increased pressure allows nitrogen bubbles to dissolve once again before a carefully controlled decompression begins. Many divers have survived because treatment was available. Recovery, however, is never guaranteed. Permanent neurological injury may remain despite prompt care, and delays reaching the chamber reduce the likelihood of a complete recovery. The Blue Hole has therefore produced another category of survivor whose names never appear among the memorial plaques. They returned to the surface breathing, spoke with companions, and seemed to have completed the dive. Only afterward did the deeper consequences emerge, reminding everyone that crossing the arch is not the final measure of success. The ascent, carried out with patience and careful decompression, has always been part of the journey from the very beginning. The story of the Blue Hole is also the story of rules that arrived slowly, shaped not by theory but by experience, gathered one accident at a time. For many years, the entrance remained remarkably open, welcoming divers from around the world with little standing between personal confidence and one of the deepest challenges in recreational diving. Modern exploration of the site began during the Israeli occupation of the Sinai Peninsula between the late 1960s and the late 1970s. In the year 1968, a team led by Alex Shell completed the first modern scuba exploration of the Blue Hole and documented the Great Tunnel, now known as the Arch. That discovery transformed an isolated sinkhole into a destination spoken of with fascination throughout the international diving community. Its beauty, unusual geology, and direct access from shore made it unlike almost anywhere else along the Red Sea coast. After Egyptian administration returned in the early 1980s, Dahab gradually developed into a thriving center for diving tourism. Throughout the late 1980s, the 1990s, and the early years of the following century, visitors arrived almost every day. Many sought ordinary recreational dives within the Blue Hole itself. Others came because they had heard stories about the Arch, whose reputation spread through magazines, conversations, photographs, and personal accounts passed from diver to diver. During those decades, formal oversight remained remarkably limited. Dive operators generally assumed that recreational divers understood the limits of their own training. The expectation was simple. Divers qualified for recreational profiles would remain within those boundaries, while only properly prepared technical divers would attempt the deeper crossing. That expectation depended almost entirely upon individual judgment, and individual judgment proved far less reliable than anyone had hoped. As the years passed, familiar patterns emerged. Recreational divers descended close enough to glimpse the entrance. Some believed that reaching it would require only a little more depth than they had previously experienced. Others trusted physical fitness or earlier successful dives. The Blue Hole offered few visible barriers, and nothing at the water's edge physically prevented an ambitious diver from continuing downward. By the time the combined effects of depth, breathing gas, and impaired judgment revealed the mistake, recovery often depended upon abilities that had already begun to diminish. The growing number of accidents gradually persuaded local authorities and the Egyptian Chamber of Diving and Water Sports that voluntary restraint alone could not provide sufficient protection. New requirements introduced certified local guides as a mandatory part of every Blue Hole dive. Rather than relying solely upon personal assurances, divers would now enter the site under the supervision of professionals responsible for planning and conducting the dive according to accepted safety standards. Practical enforcement soon followed. A police officer became a regular presence near the entrance, checking that guides held the required certification before groups entered the water. The measure did not alter the geology of the Blue Hole or weaken the forces operating beneath the surface. Instead, it created a deliberate pause before every descent, placing an external checkpoint where previously there had been only personal decision. By approximately the middle of the following decade, respected dive centers in Dahab had strengthened their own standards even further. Divers requesting an arch crossing were commonly expected to present verified technical qualifications, use carefully planned trimix, breathing gas, carry appropriate equipment, and dive alongside an equally qualified partner. Operators willing to ignore those standards became increasingly uncommon, although they never disappeared entirely. These changes have reduced the number of fatal accidents, yet they have never eliminated them. Regulations can verify equipment, qualifications, and planning, but they cannot completely measure human judgment or predict every decision made beneath increasing pressure. The same physical laws remain in place regardless of the procedures established above the surface. Near the entrance, the familiar sign continues to welcome visitors with the words, "Easy Entry, Blue Hole." It was installed long before many of today's safeguards existed and has remained through every change that followed. Standing beside the path where divers assemble their equipment, it has become an unintended reminder that accessibility and simplicity are not the same thing. The walk into the water has always been straightforward. Understanding everything that follows has taken generations of experience, written not only in manuals and regulations, but also in the lessons the Blue Hole has demanded across the passing years. There is another story carried by the Blue Hole, one that is often overshadowed by the memorials and the accident reports. It is the story of dives that unfold exactly as intended, where every decision has been made long before the diver enters the water. Those successful crossings reveal something essential. The arch is not impossible. It is simply unwilling to forgive preparation that falls short of what it demands. A properly planned arch dive begins with training that extends well beyond recreational certification. Technical diving education introduces skills that recreational courses are never intended to teach. Divers learn decompression procedures, advanced gas planning, emergency protocols, navigation in overhead environments, and disciplined decision-making under demanding conditions. Every exercise exists because the dive profile requires it, not because it adds unnecessary complexity. Equipment reflects that same philosophy. Alongside the primary cylinder, divers carry a stage tank containing breathing gas reserved for specific phases of the dive. Rather than relying entirely upon compressed air, properly planned dives commonly use trimix, a carefully balanced mixture of helium, oxygen, and nitrogen designed for the intended depth. By replacing much of the narcotic nitrogen with helium, trimix greatly reduces the mental impairment that would otherwise develop during the descent. Every cylinder is labeled, analyzed, and matched to the planned stages of the dive before anyone approaches the shoreline. Preparation also includes partnership. A technical diver does not enter the arch alone. The dive buddy carries equivalent qualifications, comparable equipment, and the same understanding of the dive plan. Together, they review expected depths, gas reserves, emergency responses, navigation references, communication procedures, and clear conditions for abandoning the dive if anything differs from expectation. Success is defined not by reaching the far side of the tunnel, but by returning safely after every planned stage has been completed. When executed correctly, the descent follows a deliberate rhythm. The divers reach approximately 55 meters, that is nearly 180 feet, position themselves carefully beneath the ceiling of the arch, and enter without unnecessary delay. The tunnel itself extends approximately 26 meters, that is nearly 85 feet, through the reef. Efficient movement matters. Excessive effort increases breathing gas consumption and disturbs fine sediment that can reduce visibility. Calm precision preserves both energy and orientation until the blue light of the open Red Sea gradually replaces the darker interior of the passage. From that point onward, the dive remains carefully structured. Gas reserves carried in the stage tank support the ascent as well as the planned decompression stops. Those pauses are expected rather than inconvenient. Depending upon the planned profile, the entire dive, including descent, tunnel transit, ascent, and decompression, commonly lasts between approximately 30 and 45 minutes, while the passage through the arch itself often requires only about 3 to 5 minutes. Every stage follows calculations completed before the dive ever began. Human capability within this environment reaches remarkable heights. William Trubridge completed the arch on a single breath without the use of fins or breathing apparatus, an achievement requiring years of disciplined training, extraordinary breath-holding ability, and intimate familiarity with the blue hole's unique conditions. His accomplishment illustrates what sustained preparation can achieve, rather than suggesting what should be attempted by others. Thousands of technical divers have completed the arch safely through careful planning, disciplined execution, and respect for physical law. Experienced instructors in Dahab often describe the crossing as one of the most beautiful dives anywhere in the world. Above the tunnel, coral formations curve like the ceiling of a vast natural cathedral. Ahead, sunlight filters through the opening into the expansive waters beyond the reef, creating a gradual transition unlike any other underwater passage. That beauty has never been the danger. The danger appears only when admiration is mistaken for readiness. The blue hole does not separate successful divers from unsuccessful ones through chance. It separates those whose preparation truly matches its demands from those whose confidence reaches the entrance before their training does. In that distinction lies the entire history of the arch and the difference between a remarkable dive and a lasting tragedy. The first impression of the blue hole is not one of danger. It is one of abundance. Sunlight pours across the water, revealing a world whose colors seem almost untouched by time. The surface gives little indication that this place has become one of the most carefully studied diving sites on Earth. Instead, it offers the appearance of effortless beauty, inviting each descent with remarkable gentleness. From the shoreline to approximately 30 meters, which is about 98 feet, the blue hole supports one of the richest recreational diving environments in the Red Sea. The surrounding reef shelters the interior from much of the surface movement, while exceptionally clear, nutrient-poor water allows light to penetrate deep below the waves. These conditions encourage thriving coral communities and dense populations of marine life, creating an underwater landscape that has earned admiration from scientists, photographers, and divers alike. Along the inner walls, branching corals, massive stone corals, and delicate soft corals grow together in remarkable variety. Their intricate forms provide shelter for countless species whose lives unfold within the spaces between the reef. The geological history of the Red Sea has shaped an ecosystem containing animals found nowhere else on Earth. Long periods of relative isolation, combined with unusually high salinity, allowed many species to evolve along their own paths, giving these waters a distinctive biological character unlike neighboring seas. Movement fills nearly every layer of the water column. Schools of brightly colored reef fish weave among the coral formations, while larger visitors occasionally pass through the open blue beyond the reef. The circular shape of the blue hole creates an ecological boundary where shallow reef meets deep open water. Such boundaries often gather life in unusual abundance, concentrating predators, grazing fish, and countless smaller organisms within the same remarkable setting. The same geography that captures the attention of divers also attracts an extraordinary range of marine creatures. For recreational visitors, this upper portion of the blue hole offers more than enough to justify the journey. Extensive coral gardens spread across depths that remain comfortably within standard recreational limits. Every descent through these waters can be memorable, without approaching the arch or entering the greater depths below. Many experienced local guides describe these coral slopes as destinations worthy of repeated visits entirely on their own, independent of the site's more famous challenge. Yet beauty has its own influence upon human judgment. A diver entering such welcoming surroundings experiences an environment that feels familiar, graceful, and richly alive. Every moment reinforces the impression that the dive is progressing comfortably. As the descent continues, remarkable scenery accompanies increasing depth with almost no obvious change in atmosphere. By the time nitrogen narcosis begins to affect thought processes, the experience has already established a powerful sense of confidence and ease that blends naturally with the visual splendor surrounding the diver. The extraordinary clarity of the Red Sea strengthens this illusion. On favorable days, visibility may extend between approximately 30 and 40 meters, which is about 98 to 131 feet. The glowing opening of the arch can therefore become visible from considerable distance. Human perception, however, struggles to judge depth accurately through such transparent water. Objects seem closer than they truly are, while the immense scale of the blue hole disguises the vertical journey still remaining beneath the diver. None of the marine life participates knowingly in this unfolding story. The parrotfish continue grazing across the coral. Schools of anthias drift above the reef with rhythmic precision. Larger fish patrol familiar routes that existed long before modern diving equipment arrived. Their presence simply creates an environment that the human mind instinctively associates with safety, exploration, and discovery, precisely as changing pressure begins altering perception below. Those who later describe close calls at the Blue Hole often remember these early moments with unmistakable warmth. The coral was every bit as magnificent as promised. The fish moved through water of astonishing clarity. Nothing about those first stages felt deceptive, because nothing truly was. The beauty remained completely genuine. It simply belonged to a place whose greatest hazards began only after admiration had already become trust. Some comparisons seem almost impossible when they are first spoken aloud. A mountain rising into the thin air above the clouds appears destined to stand apart from a circular opening beneath warm coastal water. Yet the Blue Hole and Mount Everest become unexpectedly connected when the measure is not height or depth, but the likelihood that a single ambitious decision may end without a return. William Trubridge has argued that the Blue Hole is more dangerous than Mount Everest when judged by fatality rate rather than total deaths. The statement sounds exaggerated until the numbers are examined with care. Mount Everest has claimed more than 300 confirmed lives since the first successful ascent during the 1950s. Many of those who died still remain upon the mountain because recovery at such altitude is often more dangerous than leaving them where they came to rest. During the years between 2012 and 2022, more than 80 climbers and support personnel lost their lives while attempting the summit, averaging roughly 7 or 8 deaths during each climbing season. The Blue Hole presents a very different picture. Estimates gathered from local records, dive professionals, and accident investigators suggest that between approximately 130 and 200 people died there during the years from 1997 through 2012. That corresponds to an average of roughly 8 to 13 deaths each year. Unlike Mount Everest, however, there has never been a complete official record published by the Egyptian authorities, leaving the precise total uncertain despite decades of attention from the international diving community. The comparison becomes even more complicated because neither destination shares the same population of participants. Mount Everest counts only those who deliberately attempt one of the most demanding climbs on Earth. The Blue Hole welcomes thousands of visitors every year, yet only a small fraction descend toward the arch using compressed air. Most recreational divers remain within the upper reef, enjoying spectacular coral and abundant marine life before returning safely to the shore. The relevant group is therefore not every visitor to the Blue Hole, but only those attempting its deepest challenge. Even with that uncertainty, one pattern remains remarkably difficult to dismiss. Estimates drawn from experienced instructors and accident researchers suggest that the fatality rate among recreational divers attempting the arch with ordinary compressed air equipment may exceed the percentage commonly associated with successful summit attempts on Mount Everest. Modern climbing seasons often produce fatality rates between approximately 1% and 3%, varying with weather, crowding, and mountain conditions. The precise figure for the Blue Hole cannot be calculated because the true number of arch attempts has never been recorded. Yet every reasonable estimate places the risk among the highest documented for any recreational sporting objective. Beyond mathematics lies another difference that shapes public perception. Mount Everest carries a reputation built upon hardship. Years of preparation, specialized equipment, extensive planning, and large financial commitments are widely understood as necessary before standing beneath its summit. The Blue Hole offers no comparable warning through appearance alone. It begins with a simple walk from shore, an inexpensive entrance fee, and water whose remarkable clarity suggests welcome rather than consequence. A destination reached so effortlessly rarely seems capable of producing outcomes associated with the world's greatest mountaineering expeditions. William Trubridge shared this comparison while reflecting upon the story presented in the documentary motion picture The Deepest Breath, which introduced the experiences of Alessia Zecchini and Stephen Keenan to audiences far beyond the diving world. His words carried unusual authority because they came from someone who had crossed the arch through years of disciplined preparation rather than distant observation. The comparison does not diminish the achievement of those who climb Mount Everest, nor does it exaggerate the nature of the Blue Hole. Instead, it reveals how differently human beings respond to visible and invisible danger. One challenge announces its seriousness from the horizon itself. The other waits beneath water of extraordinary beauty, where accessibility and confidence can disguise a level of risk that statistics reveal only after many journeys have already ended. Long before dive flags marked the shoreline or visitors arrived carrying tanks and cameras, other lives unfolded beside these waters. The people who knew this coast first did not come searching for records or challenges beneath the sea. They belonged to the land surrounding it, following rhythms shaped by wind, fishing, trade, and generations of memory that reached farther into the past than the modern history of recreational diving. The Bedouin tribes of the southern Sinai Peninsula, especially the Muzena and the Terabin, had lived along this coastline for centuries before Dahab became known throughout the international diving community. The settlement itself, whose name means gold, served as a modest coastal village connected by trade routes crossing desert and sea. Knowledge of the Red Sea passed from one generation to the next through daily experience rather than written instruction. Families understood the changing tides, seasonal winds, productive fishing grounds, and hidden character of the shoreline because those lessons formed part of ordinary life. Everything began to change. During the closing decades of the 20th century, as divers from around the world discovered the remarkable clarity and biodiversity of these waters. What had once been a small coastal settlement gradually transformed into an international destination. Guest houses appeared beside traditional homes, dive centers opened near the shore. Cafes welcomed travelers speaking many different languages. Tourism expanded the local economy, allowing many Bedouin families to supplement or replace fishing and trading with businesses built around the steady arrival of visitors seeking the sea. Among the enduring features of the Blue Hole is the modest cafe overlooking the water. Wooden chairs rest beneath shade, while glasses of fragrant Bedouin tea accompany conversations before and after each dive. Equipment is assembled nearby, dive plans are reviewed, and stories are exchanged after returning from the reef. Over many decades, the families operating these cafes have watched an extraordinary procession of human experience unfold. Excitement, celebration, disappointment, relief, reunion, and grief have all passed through the same familiar gathering place overlooking the water. Within the local community, another story has endured alongside the documented history of diving. According to a legend repeated through generations, the Blue Hole is haunted by the spirit of a young Bedouin woman whose life ended beneath its waters. Different versions explain her fate in different ways, yet the conclusion remains remarkably consistent. Her presence is said to draw people toward the Blue Hole and refuse to release them. The tale survives not because it explains the mechanics of diving accidents, but because every community develops stories that give emotional form to places where loss returns again and again across many years. Those who have spent their lives recovering victims from the Blue Hole describe a different reality. Tarek Omar, whose decades at the site have placed him closer to its history than almost anyone alive, has consistently rejected supernatural explanations. His understanding comes from direct experience rather than legend. The forces responsible are pressure, depth, changing gases, human judgment, and the unforgiving laws of physiology. Respect for local tradition exists alongside that conviction, yet his years beside the water have left little room for mystery regarding the physical causes of each tragedy. For the Bedouin families living beside the Blue Hole, the accumulation of memorial plaques has unfolded gradually across the passing years. They have watched grieving relatives arrive, carrying pieces of engraved stone. They have witnessed rescue boats returning in sorrow instead of celebration. Regulations have changed. Visiting generations have come and gone. Yet the relationship between the local community and the Blue Hole has remained deeply personal because its history forms part of the landscape surrounding their homes rather than a destination visited for only a few days. That closeness carries an enduring complexity. The reputation of the Blue Hole draws the international diving community to Dahab, sustaining cafes, guest houses, guides, and countless local livelihoods. Its extraordinary beauty attracts visitors, while its formidable reputation continues to fascinate them. The same place that supports the community economically also preserves memories of those who never departed. Along this shoreline, prosperity and remembrance have become woven together, each impossible to separate completely from the other, each remaining part of the living history carried beside the sea. A place can become famous for two truths that never cancel one another. The Blue Hole remains one of the most celebrated dive sites in the Red Sea, and it remains one of the most discussed locations in the history of recreational diving fatalities. Those realities have existed together for decades, shaping an enduring debate that returns whenever another memorial plaque appears upon the cliff. Many observers have argued that a location associated with an estimated 130 to 200 deaths should no longer remain open. In many regulated environments, a recurring pattern linked to a clearly identifiable hazard would lead to closure, while investigators searched for structural solutions. At the Blue Hole, the principal source of danger is well understood. The arch attracts divers beyond recreational limits, and in theory, it could be physically obstructed. Such an intervention, however, would require extensive alteration of a natural coral reef, whose geological and ecological value reaches far beyond the diving community itself. Those opposing closure point toward a different reality. Most visitors never approach the arch. Recreational divers who remain within accepted depth limits experience a dive comparable in overall risk to many other well-managed locations throughout the Red Sea. The coral gardens, abundant marine life, and exceptional visibility can all be enjoyed without descending into the depths where nitrogen narcosis and complex decompression obligations become dominant factors. Closing the entire site because a relatively small number of divers pursue its deepest challenge would remove access for thousands who visit responsibly every year. Experienced instructors often compare the situation with other activities that involve unavoidable danger. Fatal accidents occur on roads, in mountains, and across open water, yet society generally responds by improving education, equipment standards, and oversight rather than eliminating access altogether. Within that reasoning, the Blue Hole represents another environment where informed preparation, proper supervision, and appropriate certification offer a more balanced response than permanent closure. The focus shifts from removing the destination to reducing the circumstances that repeatedly produce tragedy. Economic considerations also shape the discussion. The Blue Hole supports much of the local tourism economy surrounding Dahab. Bedouin families operate cafes, guest houses, transportation services, and other businesses that depend upon the steady arrival of visitors from around the world. Dive instructors, boat crews, equipment technicians, and countless supporting workers have built their livelihoods around the continued presence of this remarkable site. Closing the Blue Hole would carry consequences extending well beyond recreational diving, affecting an entire coastal community whose daily life has become intertwined with the visitors drawn to these waters. Within the technical diving community, another principle is frequently expressed. Adults who possess advanced training, specialized equipment, and complete understanding of the risks should retain the freedom to undertake demanding dives. Technical diving has long rested upon personal responsibility, careful preparation, and disciplined decision-making. Many therefore view the arch not as an attraction requiring prohibition, but as an environment demanding competence that cannot be substituted by regulation alone. Yet, one unresolved difficulty remains beneath every argument. The decisive choice is not always made entirely upon the surface. A diver may commit to attempting the arch before entering the water, fully informed of every known hazard. By the time that same diver reaches approximately 55 meters, which is about 180 feet, nitrogen narcosis may already be affecting judgment. The decision unfolding at depth is no longer guided by the same clarity that existed only minutes earlier. The intention belongs to the surface, while the execution belongs to a mind operating under altered physiology. That distinction resists every simple solution proposed over the years. And so the Blue Hole continues as it has for decades. The police officer verifies guide certifications before divers enter the water. Local professionals emphasize planning and proper qualifications. The memorial plaques remain fixed within the cliff. Nearby, Glasses of Bedouin tea are served beneath familiar shade as new dive plans are discussed, successful dives are remembered, and another ordinary day begins beside a place whose extraordinary reputation has never been enough to bring its story to an end. Stories sometimes alter the course of a place more profoundly than maps ever can. Long before many people knew where Dahab rested upon the shore of the Red Sea, the Blue Hole lived mainly within diving circles, spoken of through training courses, expedition journals, and conversations shared after difficult dives. Then a single documentary carried its name into homes across the world, transforming a destination known by specialists into one recognized by millions. Released in the year 2023, The Deepest Breath followed the lives of Italian freediver Alessia Zecchini and Irish safety diver Keenan. Their partnership was built upon extraordinary trust, relentless preparation, and the pursuit of records measured not only by distance, but by the limits of human endurance. The narrative gradually converged upon the Blue Hole and the events of July 22, 2017, when Keenan lost his life while helping Zecchini complete her ascent. His final actions became inseparable from the history of the site itself, joining the many personal stories already carried beneath those waters. The documentary reached far beyond the usual audience for underwater exploration. It was discussed by film critics, recommended through streaming services, and shared widely across conversations that had little previous connection with freediving. Viewers encountered the Blue Hole not as an entry in a diving guide, but as the setting for a deeply human account of discipline, ambition, companionship, and loss. In doing so, the film introduced the location to countless people who had never considered the science of breath-hold diving or the unique geography that had shaped its reputation. Among the ideas that lingered most strongly was the comparison made by William Trubridge, who described the Blue Hole as more dangerous than Mount Everest when measured by fatality rate rather than total deaths. That observation traveled well beyond the documentary itself. Reviews repeated it, interviews highlighted it, and discussions throughout traditional media and online communities echoed it with remarkable consistency. The comparison became a doorway through which many people first encountered the Blue Hole, giving its reputation a scale that statistics alone had never achieved. The attention surrounding the film produced measurable curiosity. Interest in Dahab increased as people searched for photographs of the coastline, explored travel information, contacted dive centers, and planned future visits. The Blue Hole entered the imagination of travelers who previously might never have recognized its name. A documentary centered upon danger unexpectedly encouraged exploration, illustrating how compelling human narratives often inspire movement toward remarkable places rather than retreat from them. That response reflects a familiar pattern within human judgment. Knowledge of risk does not always diminish attraction. Sometimes, understanding the difficulty of a place makes it appear even more meaningful. Viewers watched an honest account of sacrifice and still imagined themselves standing beside the same water, drawn not by disregard for danger, but by the extraordinary beauty, history, and emotional weight attached to the location. The film became another example of optimism bias expressed across an entire audience rather than within a single diver. For Zecchini, the documentary did not mark an ending. She continued freediving, carrying forward both her achievements and the memory of Keenan. The broader freediving community also continued pursuing records, refining techniques, and returning to waters that demand immense respect. Meanwhile, visitors arriving at the Blue Hole encountered not only the memorial plaques, the familiar shoreline, and the enduring conversations among local instructors, but also a story they had already come to know through cinema. In that way, the deepest breath accomplished something the fatality statistics alone never could. It transformed the Blue Hole from a location discussed primarily through numbers and technical reports into a place remembered through faces, relationships, and lived experience. The documentary neither exaggerated nor softened what happened. It presented real people with compassion and restraint. Yet the fascination it awakened became another chapter in the history of the Blue Hole itself, revealing once again that understanding danger and feeling drawn toward it can exist within the same human heart. There is a moment when two very different disciplines arrive at the same stretch of reef, each carrying its own traditions, techniques, and understanding of risk. Technical divers approach the arch with carefully planned breathing gases, decompression schedules, and redundant equipment. Freedivers arrive carrying none of those things. They bring only preparation, experience, disciplined movement, and the single breath they drew at the surface before disappearing beneath the water. Crossing the arch as a freediver begins with a descent to approximately 55 meters, which is about 180 feet. From there, the diver enters a tunnel extending roughly 26 meters, that is nearly 85 feet, before emerging into the open Red Sea beyond the reef wall. Throughout the entire journey, there is no compressed breathing gas, no regulator, and no reserve cylinder waiting for an unexpected delay. Every movement depends upon the finite supply of oxygen contained within the lungs at the instant the dive begins. Because of that difference, the governing physiology changes completely. A technical diver continues breathing throughout the descent, exchanging gases with every inhalation. A freediver cannot replace a single breath until returning to the surface. The body gradually consumes oxygen, while carbon dioxide steadily accumulates, narrowing the margin for error with every passing moment. Success depends upon completing the descent, the passage through the tunnel, and the ascent before consciousness begins to fade from diminishing oxygen reserves. The depth alone places the arch among the world's most demanding freediving objectives. Reaching 55 meters, which is about 180 feet, requires exceptional equalization, efficient technique, and years of progressive adaptation for almost every athlete. Although the greatest competitive depths extend far beyond this level, those achievements represent the outer boundary of human capability, earned through extraordinary specialization rather than ordinary experience. The entrance to the arch begins where only a small fraction of freedivers possess the training to travel comfortably. The tunnel introduces another layer unlike a conventional vertical descent. Once inside, the ceiling prevents an immediate ascent toward the surface. The diver must continue swimming forward through approximately 26 meters, that is nearly 85 feet, before daylight widens once again. Any hesitation, unexpected current, imperfect navigation, or slight miscalculation of available oxygen unfolds within an overhead environment where the direct path upward no longer exists. The only meaningful choices become continuing toward the exit or reversing the entire distance already covered. That reality explains why successful crossings have remained remarkably uncommon despite worldwide interest. In the year 2007, William Trowbridge completed the first recorded no-fins traverse of the arch on a single breath. He later described the accomplishment as one of the greatest physical and mental challenges of his career, emphasizing that it resulted from focused preparation for this precise environment rather than general athletic ability. More than a decade later, in the year 2020, Thibault Gicht achieved another documented no-fins crossing, illustrating how rarely even elite freedivers attempt the route under comparable conditions. The dangers faced by freedivers differ fundamentally from those confronting technical divers. Nitrogen narcosis does not shape the experience because compressed breathing gas is absent. Instead, the greatest threat becomes oxygen depletion. A diver who underestimates the effort required spends slightly longer than expected inside the passage, or begins the dive with inadequate preparation, may reach the limits of useful oxygen before emerging from the tunnel. As the ascent continues, decreasing surrounding pressure reduces the partial pressure of oxygen available to the brain, creating the conditions that can lead to shallow water blackout even after the hardest portion of the dive appears complete. Safety divers train extensively to anticipate precisely that possibility, yet the arch changes their task as well. Within the tunnel itself, immediate access becomes restricted by the surrounding rock. Rescue can only begin once the freediver emerges from the passage or retreats toward the entrance. For that reason, the arch remains a place where exceptional accomplishments and exceptional discipline are inseparable. Each successful crossing, reflecting not fortune alone, but years of preparation, matched carefully to one remarkable stretch of underwater stone. Some places reveal the landscape beneath the water. Others reveal the landscape within the human mind. The Blue Hole has become known for both. Its history is marked by events that appear, at first glance, to belong only to geology and diving. Yet, when those events are viewed together, they form a remarkably consistent pattern, one that says as much about human judgment as it does about the sea itself. The losses associated with the arch are neither random nor mysterious. They follow recurring pathways shaped by well-documented features of human decision-making. Among the clearest are optimism bias and the Dunning-Kruger effect. These are not rare psychological curiosities. They are ordinary characteristics of the human mind, present to varying degrees in almost everyone, becoming especially influential when confidence must compete with uncertainty. Optimism bias does not erase awareness of danger. A diver preparing to attempt the arch has almost certainly heard about the memorial plaques, the stories carried through the diving community, and the long record of previous accidents. The facts are available before entering the water. What changes is the interpretation of those facts. The statistics begin to describe someone else, another diver who lacked preparation, ignored warnings, or made avoidable mistakes. Personal confidence gradually outweighs statistical reality, not because the evidence has changed, but because the mind naturally places greater trust in its own assessment than in distant probabilities. The Dunning-Kruger effect adds another layer that is particularly relevant at the Blue Hole. A recreational diver who has completed advanced recreational training possesses genuine knowledge and valuable experience. Those accomplishments deserve respect because they represent real skill developed through careful practice. Yet, technical diving belongs to a different discipline rather than simply a higher level of the same activity. It requires distinct breathing gases, decompression planning, emergency procedures, equipment configuration, and extensive rehearsal for situations that recreational instruction never intends to address. Someone standing at the boundary between those worlds may possess enough experience to believe the transition is modest, while lacking the deeper understanding needed to recognize how substantial the difference truly is. The setting itself contributes to this pattern in subtle ways. Clear water, extending approximately 30 meters, that is nearly 100 feet, through the upper layers, allows coral formations and schools of reef fish to remain visible far below the surface. Warm sunlight, vivid colors, and effortless visibility create an environment that encourages exploration rather than restraint. The human nervous system interprets surroundings like these as welcoming. Attention shifts naturally toward discovery, while vigilance softens almost without notice. By the time nitrogen narcosis begins influencing thought at greater depth, it encounters a mind already inclined toward continuation. The surroundings have offered reassurance instead of warning. Physical movement has become rhythmic and familiar, and the objective ahead appears increasingly attainable. The chemistry of compressed nitrogen does not create confidence from nothing. Instead, it amplifies a direction that thought has already begun to follow, reducing the ability to question decisions that moments earlier might have seemed worthy of closer examination. Those who complete the arch successfully illustrate the opposite principle. Technical divers and elite freedivers are not defined by extraordinary courage alone, nor by general talent that applies equally to every underwater challenge. Their success reflects preparation tailored precisely to the demands before them. Every aspect of the dive, from breathing gas selection to navigation, emergency planning, timing, and practiced responses, has been matched carefully to the environment they expect to encounter. The Blue Hole rewards that precision with remarkable consistency. From the shoreline, the distinction between broad competence and specific readiness remains invisible. During the descent, it can remain invisible as well. Only when the demands of the arch align perfectly with the limits of preparation does the difference become unmistakable, revealing that the most significant boundary at the Blue Hole has never been drawn by coral or stone, but by the remarkable strengths and enduring imperfections of the human mind. There are places whose history is preserved in books, archives, and official reports. The Blue Hole has those as well, yet much of its memory lives inside one person who has returned to the same descent again and again for decades. Tarek Omar has spent more than 30 years working beneath these waters, long enough for familiarity to become something deeper than experience. The contours of the reef, the changing light, the hidden ledges, and the shifting currents have become as familiar to him as the rooms of a lifelong home. When Omar speaks about recovering those who never returned, he calls each operation a mission. The choice of that word carries unusual weight. A mission demands planning, disciplined execution, careful assessment of danger, and respect for everyone involved. It transforms an act of recovery into one of purpose, acknowledging that every descent must be approached with the same precision expected of any demanding technical dive. Beneath that practical language rests another truth, one that allows difficult work to continue without diminishing the humanity of those whose journeys ended there. His description of the Blue Hole itself is equally revealing. He has said that he knows it like his kitchen. Such familiarity is not the confidence of someone who believes the place has become harmless. It is the intimacy earned by thousands of descents across changing seasons, changing conditions, and changing responsibilities. Every corner of the formation carries memories attached to specific dives, successful expeditions, demanding recoveries, and conversations held afterward along the shoreline. The landscape has become inseparable from the lives that have passed through it. When Omar reflects upon those who died, his words rarely contain anger or contempt. He does not describe them as foolish people incapable of learning. Instead, he returns repeatedly to the difference between what they believed they were prepared to do and what the dive actually required. The distinction matters because it recognizes genuine ability, while acknowledging that genuine ability is not always sufficient. Preparation must match the exact demands waiting beneath the surface. Anything less leaves a gap that may remain hidden until there is no opportunity left to close it. That understanding became deeply personal in the case of Yuri Lipski. Omar warned him before the dive, then warned him again, hoping the message would persuade him to reconsider. Lipski entered the water regardless. The following morning, Omar descended once more, not for exploration but for recovery. Beside Lipski rested the camera that had continued recording until the final moments of the dive. Omar later returned the camera to Lipski's mother, and only a short time afterward helped her dismantle the diving equipment so she could carry it home. The technical details of the incident have been studied extensively, yet those simple human actions remain among its most enduring moments. Across 3 decades, the number of recoveries has grown beyond easy counting. Individual totals eventually lose meaning, replaced instead by memories that refuse to fade. Omar remembers the pair of Irish divers discovered together at approximately 102 meters, which is about 335 feet. He remembers the camera still operating beneath the water. He remembers families arriving to place memorial plaques along the cliff, each inscription adding another name to a shoreline already filled with remembrance. In many ways, Omar has become the living memory of the Blue Hole. Scientific papers explain the geology, physiology, and psychology that shape events there. Dive logs preserve technical information. Official records document only part of the story. Omar carries something different, a continuous sequence of lived experience extending across decades, connecting individual tragedies with the practical lessons each one revealed. His own achievements beneath the water complete that picture rather than contradict it. At the same site where he has spent years recovering others, Omar completed a dive reaching approximately 209 meters, that is nearly 686 feet. Such a descent was not an argument against caution, nor an attempt to prove immunity from danger. Instead, it demonstrated the principle he has expressed throughout his career. The Blue Hole does not demand fear. It demands preparation measured precisely against the challenge waiting below, nothing less and nothing more. Some places eventually surrender every measurable secret they possess, yet still leave behind a question that refuses to disappear. The Blue Hole has reached that uncommon point. Divers, physicians, psychologists, engineers, and experienced instructors have examined its geology, its water, its depth profile, and the chain of events repeated through decades. Their conclusions align with remarkable consistency, and still the pattern continues, asking for something beyond another technical explanation. In the scientific sense, very little about the site remains mysterious. The formation of the reef has been mapped. The dimensions of the arch are known. The physiological effects of compressed gases at depth have been studied for generations. Nitrogen narcosis, decompression requirements, gas consumption, buoyancy changes, and the consequences of delayed ascent all follow principles that can be described, measured, and demonstrated. The mechanisms leading to many fatal accidents are neither hidden nor speculative. They are understood with unusual clarity, making each recurring tragedy less a discovery than the repetition of an established sequence. Yet knowledge alone has never guaranteed different decisions. That is the part no equation fully resolves. A diver may understand every relevant principle before entering the water, recite the procedures correctly, recognize the historical record, and still arrive at the point where personal judgment diverges from objective reality. Information exists outside the mind until the moment it becomes part of genuine self-assessment. Between those two states lies a distance that cannot be measured with instruments, yet it has shaped the history of the Blue Hole as surely as the limestone surrounding it. The regulations introduced over recent years have changed the pattern in meaningful ways. Certified guides accompany divers, professional oversight begins before entry into the water. Technical qualifications receive greater scrutiny, and reputable dive operators require appropriate equipment and carefully planned breathing gas for demanding objectives. These measures have reduced unnecessary exposure to the greatest hazards. They have narrowed the pathway leading unprepared divers toward the arch, demonstrating that thoughtful regulation can influence outcomes without transforming the character of the site itself. Even so, regulation reaches only as far as human behavior allows. A certification card confirms completed training, but it cannot reveal how carefully that knowledge has been maintained, how honestly personal limits have been evaluated, or how faithfully a dive plan will be followed once circumstances begin to change. Those decisions unfold beneath the surface, beyond the reach of signs, checkpoints, and official procedures. By the time nitrogen narcosis begins affecting perception at approximately 55 meters, which is about 180 feet, new warnings lose much of their power because the mind receiving them is already working with diminished clarity. The memorial plaques therefore continue to increase, although more gradually than during earlier decades. Their presence suggests that progress and permanence are not always the same achievement. Many of those reaching the arch today possess stronger credentials than those who attempted it during the least regulated years. That reality introduces another layer of complexity. Formal qualification establishes a foundation, yet the Blue Hole demands preparation extending beyond certificates into experience, disciplined repetition, careful planning, and the willingness to abandon an objective whenever conditions no longer match expectations. Training can reproduce many elements of demanding dives, but no controlled exercise perfectly recreates the exact convergence waiting within the arch. The interaction of depth, overhead passage, altered perception, optical distortion, breathing gas management, and decompression obligations creates a combination unlike ordinary technical environments. Each factor is familiar on its own. Their simultaneous arrival forms the challenge that has proven so resistant to complete elimination. Meanwhile, the reef itself remains unchanged by every discussion surrounding it. The opening still leads toward the same passage. The blue light beyond the tunnel continues to filter through clear water exactly as it has for thousands of years. The stone carries no memory of names, no awareness of triumph, no recognition of loss. It simply endures, while each generation returns with greater understanding, hoping that understanding will finally become wisdom, carried all the way through the descent. The deepest lesson carried upward from the Blue Hole does not belong only to diving. It belongs wherever human beings mistake understanding for readiness, wherever the ability to explain something is confused with the ability to perform it, when every variable becomes real. Beneath the surface of this single place lies a distinction that reaches far beyond the waters of the Red Sea, touching nearly every discipline in which preparation determines whether knowledge becomes action. The difference revealed here is not the difference between awareness and ignorance. It is the distance between knowing a fact and embodying a skill. A diver may understand that nitrogen narcosis becomes increasingly significant at approximately 55 meters, which is about 180 feet. The same diver may also understand gas management, decompression obligations, buoyancy, and navigation as separate ideas. Yet performing all of those tasks together, while perception gradually changes with depth and every decision influences the next, belongs to another category entirely. Information can be memorized in a classroom. Competence must be carried into the precise conditions where it will eventually be tested. This distinction appears throughout human endeavor. A medical student may describe every stage of a demanding operation long before steady hands and practiced judgment make that operation possible. A pilot studies procedures extensively before encountering changing weather, mechanical failures, and the weight of responsibility inside a real cockpit. Climbers spend years preparing before attempting the highest peaks, understanding that familiarity with maps and equipment cannot substitute for countless hours spent adapting to the mountain itself. The same principle extends into every demanding profession, where performance depends not merely upon accumulated knowledge, but upon experience shaped under authentic conditions. The Blue Hole makes this truth unusually visible because it allows almost no opportunity for correction. At approximately 55 meters, which is about 180 feet, the consequences of misjudging personal capability unfold with extraordinary speed. There is no comfortable pause for reflection beneath the arch, no chance to return another day carrying lessons learned from a failed attempt. Every decision accompanies the diver through the descent, and the environment responds only to physics, physiology, and time. It offers neither encouragement nor punishment. It simply remains consistent while human judgment determines the outcome. Human cognition evolved in circumstances where confidence often carried practical advantages. Individuals willing to attempt difficult tasks frequently gained food, territory, experience, or social standing, even after occasional failure. In ordinary life, the cost of overestimating personal ability is often embarrassment, inconvenience, or another opportunity to improve. Optimism, therefore, became a remarkably persistent feature of the human mind, encouraging persistence long after uncertainty first appeared. Within environments where mistakes remain survivable, that tendency can become an unexpected strength. The Blue Hole belongs to a different category of environment. Evolution did not prepare the human brain for compressed gases, profound depth, or an overhead passage carved into ancient limestone beneath the sea. It does not negotiate with inherited instincts. It simply contains a tunnel approximately 26 meters long that is nearly 85 feet, suspended at a depth where physiology and perception begin changing together. The environment neither recognizes confidence nor discounts hesitation. It responds only to the realities carried into it. Every diver remembered by the plaques possessed some understanding of the risks before entering the water. What proved decisive was not the absence of information, but an imperfect measurement of the distance separating knowledge from practiced capability. By the time altered perception began reshaping judgment, that measurement had already become less reliable. The Blue Hole therefore leaves behind a lesson extending far beyond diving itself. Wisdom begins where knowledge is measured honestly against preparation, and where the space between the two is acknowledged before the descent ever begins. Long before a diver reaches the shoreline, another path begins along the weathered cliff above the water. It is lined not with instructions or barriers, but with small pieces of stone and metal fastened into the rock by hands that traveled great distances for a single purpose. Together they form perhaps the most truthful portrait of the Blue Hole, not because they explain it, but because every plaque marks a life that ended within sight of the place where the inscription now remains. Each memorial represents an act requiring remarkable intention. Parents, partners, relatives, and lifelong friends journey across countries to reach Dahab, carrying memories instead of diving equipment. They stand above the same water their loved one entered, bringing with them photographs, stories, and grief that cannot be measured. The installation itself is deliberate. A plaque must be positioned against the stone, secured carefully, and left behind where wind, sun, and salt will slowly weather its surface. It becomes both remembrance and witness, rooted permanently in the landscape where absence first became real. Walking beside these memorials reveals striking differences from one inscription to another. Some contain only a name accompanied by dates, allowing the simplest facts to carry the greatest weight. Others preserve fragments of personality, a favorite saying, or a belief that once guided an ordinary life before it became part of this shoreline. Among the most frequently remembered is the inscription honoring James Smith, declaring, "Do not let fear stand in the way of your dreams." The words continue speaking long after the person who inspired them disappeared beneath the surface, carrying meanings that shift with every reader who pauses before them. Farther along the cliff rest the memorials for Daniel Malik and Tarek El-Kadi, whose deaths during the late 1980s remain the earliest widely documented fatalities associated with the Blue Hole. Their plaques stand as the oldest visible markers within a collection that has continued growing through succeeding decades. Every newer memorial joins an existing conversation already carved into the rock, extending a chronology written not by institutions or official records, but by families who refused to allow memory to fade into anonymous statistics. Seen together, these plaques do not celebrate danger, nor do they condemn the sea beneath them. They reveal something more enduring. Each individual story arose from unique circumstances, different equipment, different experience, different weather, different decisions, and different moments beneath the water. Yet viewed across generations, those separate lives form a recognizable pattern, repeating with remarkable consistency. Divers have arrived from many nations, speaking different languages and carrying different ambitions, yet the same sequence has returned often enough for the cliff itself to become an archive of shared human experience. Most of the people who later placed these memorials never expected to do so. Before the journey, they knew the Blue Hole through photographs, stories, or the enthusiasm of someone eager to dive there. Beauty, challenge, and reputation reached them first. The broader history often arrived only afterward, delivered through loss instead of curiosity. Their return to this shoreline transformed them from distant observers into guardians of memory, adding another name where they had once expected only celebration. Every diver walking toward the entry point passes these plaques. They cannot easily be overlooked, fixed prominently against the stone where nearly every approach leads. Some visitors stop for several moments, reading names and messages one by one. Others continue after only a passing glance, absorbing the memorials as part of the familiar scenery surrounding a celebrated dive site. That difference reflects the same tendency explored throughout this story, the subtle habit of interpreting tragedy as something belonging more naturally to another person than to oneself. Beneath the cliff, none of these memorials alters the water. The passage remains unchanged. The blue opening beyond the arch continues to receive the same filtered light, and the surrounding sea continues following the same unchanging laws of physics. Above, the plaques preserve human memory. Below, the Blue Hole preserves only its enduring form, while each generation leaves another small inscription upon the stone overlooking it. Morning arrives without ceremony, and the Blue Hole remains exactly where it has always been. Tomorrow, it will welcome another line of divers stepping from the shore, just as it did yesterday, and just as it has for decades. The weathered sign continues to promise an easy entry. Beneath the surface, the arch still rests at 55 meters, which is about 180 feet. The water remains among the clearest in the Red Sea, revealing extraordinary beauty without revealing every consequence hidden within it. Darkness never changes the nature of this place. After sunset, the coral continues its ancient rhythms. Fish weave through familiar passages, and the limestone chamber preserves the same proportions it held throughout countless seasons. Nothing beneath the surface becomes kinder or harsher because daylight fades. The arch remains suspended at 55 meters, which is about 180 feet, shaped by the same geological history that began when the ceiling of an ancient cave collapsed thousands of years ago. The surrounding sea follows the same physical laws from one hour to the next, unchanged by memory or reputation. At this very moment, somewhere within that enduring landscape, different journeys unfold together. A recreational diver drifts among coral gardens, well within established limits, discovering colorful marine life in complete comfort. A technical diver descends carrying carefully planned equipment, breathing a gas mixture selected specifically for the depth, following procedures refined through years of disciplined preparation. Nearby, an experienced freediver may be practicing controlled descents in open water, moving with deliberate precision through the upper reaches of the shaft before returning smoothly toward daylight. The same place supports each of these experiences because each belongs within different boundaries defined by preparation rather than ambition alone. Elsewhere in Dahab, another story begins before a single fin touches the sea. Someone hears about the Blue Hole through conversation, through photographs, through a travel guide, or through a documentary shared by friends. An image gradually forms in the imagination, combining remarkable beauty with remarkable possibility. Alongside that image grows another belief, a personal estimate of capability, shaped by everything the future diver already knows and everything that has not yet been learned through experience. That belief is often accurate in many respects, while remaining incomplete in one important way. Knowledge can describe equipment, procedures, physics, and previous tragedies with remarkable precision, yet it cannot automatically produce the judgment required to apply each lesson under the exact conditions where it matters. The missing distance between understanding and readiness rarely announces itself from the surface. It remains invisible until preparation has become specific enough to replace assumption with practiced competence. Long before Dahab became known throughout the diving world, the limestone beneath the Red Sea was already changing at a pace too gradual for any lifetime to witness directly. Mineral dissolved into water, passages widened, and the familiar tunnel slowly assumed the shape recognized today. That transformation continues even now. Across immense spans of time, the arch will continue changing, sea level will continue shifting, and the waters separating the African and Arabian tectonic plates will continue widening. These vast geological rhythms unfold without reference to human calendars, achievements, or losses. Yet none of those distant changes influences the diver preparing for the next descent. What matters remains beautifully simple and permanently exact. 55 meters, which is about 180 feet. 26 meters of overhead passage, that is nearly 85 feet. The pressure created by that depth, the effects upon perception that arrive without announcement. The requirement for preparation matched precisely to every one of those realities. The Blue Hole possesses no intention, no expectation, and no memory. It does not wait with purpose. It simply exists as a geological structure shaped by water, stone, chemistry, and time. The remarkable blue radiance beyond the arch is entirely real. Sunlight filtered through 55 meters, which is about 180 feet, of exceptionally clear water before reaching the far end of a tunnel 26 meters long that is nearly 85 feet. Those who have emerged after seeing that light often describe it among the most extraordinary underwater sights of their lives. Above the shoreline, the familiar sign continues, greeting arriving divers. Along the cliff, the memorial plaques remain fixed within the stone. Below them, the sea endures exactly as it always has, unchanged, enduring, and patiently existing beyond every human story.